Hello and welcome to the Ranching Returns podcast, where we believe that when done right, your return on ranching can be far more than just extreme profitability, but a return to your land resource as well as a priceless lifestyle. Hey there, and welcome back to the Ranching Returns podcast, sponsored by Faro Cattle Company. I sure hope you're having a wonderful summer. Today's episode is a fun one. It's with Lloyd Calvert, who's the manager of the High Lonesome Ranch, and put in a pretty cool position or unique opportunity to take a ranch and to really, the goal of him coming in as manager in the last few years has really been to take this ranch and turn it into a profitable, successful ranch. It's a large-scale ranch in the Colorado mountains. Some unique challenges to that region that he was asked to create a profitable ranch within. And so we talk about all the ways that he did that. We talk about his change in his genetics, his use of virtual fence, his plans going forward, and the things they're looking to do to make this ranch successful, and dive into all the details of that. And it was a lot of fun talking to Lloyd, so I hope that you enjoy it. I did want to take a moment to give a shout out to one of my sponsors today. That is Ambrook. Ambrook is an online accounting software that I actually use on my farm. I use it in my rental property business. It allows me to break out expenses based on the property, which I really like, so I can see which of my rentals are profitable, making lots of money, which ones are losing money, just like you would in a farm. And you can do on your farm, breaking out enterprises from stockers to cow-calf, row crops, and different things like that. And so that's actually, we do the same thing on our farm as well, and we also use it in our personal businesses and incomes, from my wife's side gigs to this podcast. And allows me, also been using it just to get a better handle on my personal spending and tracking my personal expenses and stuff as well. So Ambrook has been a phenomenal tool for me to get a handle on the numbers of my personal and business expenses and incomes. And I really do recommend it. It's super convenient. You can access it from either a really easy to use app or from your computer, and do pretty much everything on both. It's easy to upload receipts. As soon as I fill up a tank with gas in a farm truck, I upload that receipt, and I've got it tagged to that expense, so I don't have to worry about it when it comes to tax time. Lots of convenience features with Ambrook, and I am confident that you will like it. If you're interested in learning more, check out ambrook.com. With that, I think we are going to dive into today's podcast with Lloyd Calvert, and I hope that you enjoy. Lloyd, thanks so much for joining me, and welcome to the Ranching Returns podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I had a listener reach out and recommend that I look into your ranch, or the ranch you work for, the High Lonesome. And I was just checking out the website, and it looks awesome. Really cool stuff. Beautiful area. I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. So maybe, I guess, to start, if you could give me an overview of the ranch as it sits today, what it is, and then dive into, I guess, your history, or the history of the ranch, and kind of how it came to be what it is.
Okay. We are a working ranch in western Colorado, just outside Grand Junction. The ranch kind of stretches from Loma around the Book Cliffs and back down to Debec. We do have some area that touches I-70. The long-term vision of the ranch is conservation and regenerative agriculture in a working context. So we are using the tenets of regenerative agriculture on working range lands to promote our vision of conservation and land stewardship on a dramatic scale in western Colorado. Our land is high desert and very, very complex topography, ranging from about 4,500 feet to 8,500 feet.
Wow.
The desert landscapes are, well, they look like the desert. The feed is sparse and not very dense, especially in years like this with lots of big washes and complicated topography, but it's simpler than the mountain country, and it makes excellent winter range. And then as you move north, the canyons get really big. So between the valley floor and the top of the mountains, which are really mesas, it's about 2,000 to 2,500 feet. And the mesas are almost like the canyon floor turned inside out. So topography does a lot of our fencing and cattle containment on both ends. So if we do go to the mountain, it's climbing a steep shelf road that's generally 10 to 15% grade.
Wow.
and over 2 or 3 miles. So it makes for some very complicated livestock handling. Water, I would say, is our biggest constraint. Every pasture we use is always, I don't want to say heavily restricted by water, but the way we use it is always determined by water.
Sure.
We do have some perennial springs or springs and creeks, but they're fed by a seep. So we think there's big underground reservoirs that collect the snow melt, and then it comes out of the ground in the shale, and that's what creates our creeks, which
Wow.
is a bit of a shift because I'm used to snow direct runoff being the
Right.
source of the creek, like a headwater.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because we don't necessarily have to deal with evaporation, but we also can't see how
Hmm.
much water is there. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You
yeah,
never know when it'll run out. Yes.
yeah.
And it always does run out at some point or
Uh, the
seasonally.
the main perennial creeks have not.
Okay.
Somebody who has some history here, generational history, says since the 30s is the
Okay.
last time that the creeks went dry.
Wow.
This year's is scary, but so far they're running. If we can
Yeah.
get some rain, these spring rains helped us out a ton.
Good.
A lot of the springs are charged up pretty well right now. They're running okay.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I'd say water and topography are our biggest constraints that we have to overcome, and figuring out how to use the abundance of land that we have access to.
Yeah. So I want to dive into all that because I've got a million questions. As a guy from Southeast Minnesota, it's very different. You're dealing with very different challenges than I am. But I'm curious, is this like your a family place? Is this what's the history of this place? Has it been around a long time? Is it owned, deeded acres, government leases? How does, what's kind of the history of the place?
It's 30,000 deeded acres and 195,000 of BLM. Its history was it was started as a guest hunting ranch, I believe, in the late 80s and early 90s, and it's kind of an accumulation of old homesteads and private parcels that were anchor properties to the allotments. It was primarily a guest and hunting ranch. Hunting was its primary drive for most of its existence. Then in about 2019 to 2020, maybe even a little earlier than that, it started shifting towards this working ranch with a regenerative conservation vision. And then
Hmm.
it's still in the process of transforming. It's undergoing major transformation still
What
into that.
what kind of transformations or what is yeah, what's that look like?
Well, I think the simplest answer is we're defining how to do it. So previous management was a lot more confined. They really adopted the more basic practices of regenerative agriculture. So smaller electric fence paddocks in the draws where we had the perennial creeks and the watersheds. I mean, they're pretty big. They're 20 miles long, but the execution wasn't ideal, and there was a lot of the understanding of animals that was lacking, and a lot of the how to really utilize this kind of land, which we're really discovering. So when I came on, I designed a system where we would start on the desert in Loma and walk the cows back to Debec each year as a general concept. We could go both directions, but it really relies on the desert ground in Loma being the wintering ground, which is a
Mm-hmm.
great reduction in hay needs and
Yeah.
inputs. So when I came on, we drastically reduced the inputs and the hay costs, and then we started really working to train the cattle. So one of the downsides of that kind of paddock management is the cows don't really learn to travel and pair up and
Hmm.
sort of fend for themselves, contribute to their own success. So that was kind of the first part we started teaching them. These big canyons have a lot of benches with an abundance of feed. So we'd go out on horses, and they weren't really familiar with horses or that kind of stockmanship at all. And we'd push them up onto the benches to encourage them to graze up there and then come back down for water. So
Hmm. Hmm.
at first we kind of had to stray from the basics of regenerative management, at least the practice itself, not the concept. to teach them how to utilize this kind of land. And then that was training for getting them on top of one of the mountains. And that went pretty well. Like I said, that was a 3-mile push over a 14% grade to get them up on top.
Wow. Yeah.
And then there were springs up there, natural seeps that go into tire tanks. And we learned a lot about what it was going to take to keep them watered and keep them spread out and everything. And then we did well up there, came back down, had a really good calf sale. Our calf weights increased a lot. The market, of course, is helping, but showed great progress reducing inputs and changing the management to yield better production while still focusing on the concept of the soil being one of our highest priorities, if not the highest priority in the management.
Okay. So you said like the weights went up and stuff. That was just kind of getting them to figure out how to utilize the grass and the water appropriately and stuff, so they weren't starving or going without water for long periods of time. They were just able to better balance their diet, I guess, or?
Yeah, it's hard to draw the line directly. They were used to living on the creek, and I think the bigger thing with the weights of the calves is that the cows didn't really care where the calves were.
Sure.
Because they were just always right there. And so the mothering wasn't very good. So I think by forcing the cows to remember to pair up and using, cow knowledge to help them do that and make them do that, but also putting pressure on them to do that yielded really good results. And then I also think that giving them a little more space helped a lot, and exposing them to more variety in the country helped them a lot too. The diversity of plants and the challenge of figuring it out on their own. And we were still heavily involved. It's not like we just turned them out. We were with them every single day, but it was just a different way of doing that. Instead of managing the fence, we were managing the cattle.
Yeah.
And so a lot more day grazing and a lot more watching the cows and seeing how they were reacting. And instead of just targeting pounds per acre, we were targeting what the effect was on the ground and the effect on the animals, primarily over really massive, complex topography and other complications, I guess, just of this kind of land. And then and I guess what we were setting out to sort of prove is that can this be done in a big moving regenerative concept, where as we add animals, we will get more of the effects, more density and everything else, but the system will be built to accommodate it. So instead of just targeting, like, we have this number of cows and we're going to build this size of a pasture and we're going to just focus on that, it was more, how do we take this from 250 pairs to 600 over time and still have a framework for managing them effectively and getting the outcomes we're looking for at the same time over time while expanding.
Yeah. And I guess in the first question, I guess, is how do people is this kind of landscape typically just like a really, really low stocking rate, turn cattle out and let them figure it out kind of a thing? And you're trying to incorporate just a little bit of management to figure out to better utilize it? Is that sort of? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good description. I think it would depend on the manager at the time. It's very hard to manage tightly, especially in the creek bottoms. It would be very tempting to just let the cows wander around, but you lose all control of what areas they're just going to hammer and not. And I think that over the transition time when the ranch was a hunting ranch but had cattle, they were managed that way. And then in the shift, the managers were trying to be very regenerative with very little consideration for the natural constraints of the land. And now we're trying to find the balance between the traditional management, the heavy regenerative management, and what might actually work here.
Yeah. And would most people sort of be underutilizing grass because they're not somehow managing with the water in the system? Like, I imagine on that kind of a system, there's just a lot of underutilized grass, and by incorporating some management and moving cattle strategically, you can get better utilization and increase stocking rates and stuff? Is that, well, I apologize if this isn't making a lot of sense. It just seems like in my mind, probably like is land cost and feed cost not necessarily the limiting factor, but utilization and the strategic management of it is what really
Yes.
can take your business to the next level. Probably.
Yes, absolutely. I'd say getting them to use benches, number one, meaning climb
Right.
500 to 1,000 feet away from water and
Yeah.
take the calf and stay up there and then come back down when
Yeah.
it's time for water and then turn around and go back up. Sort of combating the laziness of the cow. That's one instance where what you're saying is very true. And then the other instance is we have a lot of land that's extremely remote.
Mm.
3 to 6 hours in a truck to get there. And
Wow.
so figuring out how to utilize that without tremendous amounts of risk would be the next stage. So we have that daily management like you're talking about, and then we have the bigger picture, how to use some of these really remote sections of the ranch, haul water to 'em.
Mm.
Really, it's building a resilient system to use
Yeah.
everything on the ranch regardless of the year.
Yeah.
And in an extreme drought like this, we're proving that it's very possible, actually.
Yeah. So first, I want to talk about you talked about two pieces there, like utilizing the grass there, kind of those steps. Is that what you call them? Or the kind of
Benches.
benches? Yeah. Yeah. And then the distant ground, remote ground. So starting with the benches and stuff, is that a daily thing, or do you train them and then over time they just do this naturally, or are you daily out there pushing them to grass and then they kind of, I mean, how much intensive management is involved in that?
To remain in business and leave a legacy for the next generation, today's rancher and farmer must not only be efficient, but strive to be sustainable by preserving our natural resources. Healthy soil is the foundation of every strong operation, and education is the key to learning about new innovative ways, not only to maintain, but to continue to build that healthy foundation. At the Bottom Line Conference in Lakin, Kansas, we're going to dig into the essentials, like building organic matter, water infiltration, retention, and the variables that drive long-term productivity and sustainability. You're going to hear from past podcast guests Grant Harder and Kit Farrow as they share real-world strategies for building resilient soils and profitable herds. And this year, we're proud to present nationally recognized speaker Jolene Brown. She's going to be delivering a very powerful guidance on family business transition planning, so be sure and bring your business partners and the entire family. Strong soil, strong legacy. Your bottom line starts right here in Lakin, Kansas. The dates are Thursday, August 20th and Friday, August 21st at the Kearney County Fairgrounds on the west side of Lakin, just south of Highway 50. Now, for all the details, go to bottomlineconference.org.
It started daily, for sure, every other day. Now they're starting to understand the concept better.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of depends. So you'll push them up there and like, oh, this is great. And they'll come running back down.
Yeah.
And then you'll push them up there again. And then usually by the third time, they are just up there.
Okay. I like how
And
this
so I think
grass
some
works.
of it, yeah, some of it you'd say, well, they just, when they run out of feed in the bottom, then they'll go up there. But that's not what we're doing. We are trying to protect the bottom by making them use the top so
Sure.
that we get an even utilization across both as much as possible.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
an interesting occurrence last year, we pushed them in this canyon called Corral Canyon, and it was where we were going to climb the mountain. The road comes up out of it, and it's really hard to describe how big this canyon is. I think it's probably, I don't know, 10,000 acres might be too big, but somewhere in there,
Wild.
5 to 10,000 acres of
Yeah.
brush and really big benches and ruthless topography. The canyon's really narrow and brushy. You can't, even if you take a horse in, you can't really get off the road anywhere, but the
Right.
cows can.
Yeah.
So there's just really limited mobility until you get up into the middle of it. And then there's big reservoirs and springs and all this kind of country. But anyway, the cows were all standing down at the fence, wanting to come back out into the flat and stand in the feed we left behind or as residual. And so I was just me on my foot with my dogs, and I chased them, just pushed them up a different side of the canyon and got them on a trail and just kept putting pressure on them for a while and then I left thinking that this was going to be a daily problem and maybe the whole grazing plan wasn't going to work, and came back the next day and couldn't find them. And they had climbed up to the top and they discovered a big reservoir that I didn't know about with multiple springs around it and phenomenal feed, just country I'd never seen before. I was like, oh, wow, okay, this buys us some time. Great. And so then a couple days later, I went in and it's like, okay, now it's time to try and climb the mountain. And again, I tried to get him out and I couldn't get him out of the brush by myself, which was humbling. And so then we went in with a crew to get him out and get him towards where they were going to climb the mountain. And again, they were gone. And they had found a trail that came off that reservoir and they started wrapping across the benches and they found springs, abundant feed. They just built their own world up there, completely took care of themselves and everything. I mean,
That's
really
awesome.
a cattleman's dream. And, here I am thinking that this country's too rough and inhospitable for cattle and too difficult to manage. And the cows are out there just doing their thing, finding
Right.
water, thriving, and all that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, it's this balance.
Right.
So it's a combination. Sometimes we have to push them every day and get them off of what they really like and where they really want to be. And sometimes they just take off and go get in really tough country that we can't even get to.
Yeah.
But I do think overall there's a herd culture that we're developing both through this training and through culling that's teaching these animals where to look for feed and how to function around water. And I think that relies on us to be very consistent about what we're doing. So when we're hauling water, we're very consistent with them that way. On the desert, we're consistent in our expectation of how far they would travel, how frequently we move water, when in the scope of utilization we move them. And then that translates, that's what makes the desert so important, is that's how they train their calves. And that's how we're training them before we get into really rough country where we can't find them. And then we carry that into the canyons. And then when we get up on top of the mountain, it changes again because we do have some natural reservoirs and springs and water becomes a little bit more abundant on part of the mountain. And then we move to the other part of the mountain, it's a lot less abundant and requires a lot more interaction. And then when we drop into the valleys on the perennial creeks, then they have an abundance of water and it's managing how they travel away from it and holding them up the valley or down the valley long enough to get the impact we want before we allow them to move again. So the topography really defines the dynamic of how the herd is using it. And then we just try and stay really consistent in our goals and outcomes and make sure that the cows kind of understand as much as a cow can how their environment's changing.
In this context, this is how I am treated. This is what's expected of me and stuff. And then you see you're consistent within a given context so that the next time they're in that context, they kind of are familiar with what to expect from you and from the environment, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. That's fascinating.
And so we've done a whole lot of culling. I'd say we've now reached the sort of the base herd. And now it's time to start really growing off of what we have.
Sure. So were you culling for animals that weren't figuring out the system, or what was the kind of culling criteria in that scenario?
It's a combination of things. Stuff that really wanted to stay behind and didn't want to move.
Sure.
That was always in the back or always fighting. We culled. We've kind of changed our management philosophy a little bit. It was interesting. Last year was the first year they were on the desert and they got very aggressive. If you went to go grab their calves, and we had some negative incidences of really aggressive cows where we had to bring in extra help to deal with, getting the calf off the rope with a cow that just wouldn't let, you're on the end of a 60-foot rope and you get anywhere close and she starts chasing you around. So we got rid of a lot of those, but at the same time, we just stopped tagging.
Sure. Okay.
And that kind of generated a different opportunity in that we could, when we tag at branding, we could count steers and heifers with the tags. And so it created an opportunity for a different way of using
Right.
that system
Yeah.
and less reliant on us manually pairing the cow and calf, and instead expecting that they are going to do that and just taking that out of the operational system. So some cows got cold for being aggressive when we touched their calves. Some got cold because they didn't want to move well. Some obviously for breed up. Some of them were just continually showing up as a problem for a variety of reasons, and they got cold.
Right.
And we
Yeah.
sold some bred cows on that list. We used that as an opportunity. Instead of just culling all the opens, we transferred some of the opens into the grass finished beef program. The really aggressive open culls we just sold, but then everything on the cull list that was bred, we marketed in a bred sale out of Loma, and maximized that as a revenue return, and then
Right.
had plans to replace them, but the drought has gotten so bad that we didn't end up increasing the cow-calf herd this year.
Okay. I like that a lot. All of what you just said, that just pretty much anything for any reason that's not fitting the system, whether it's a labor concern or, they're not surviving just the terrain, or they're not surviving the management system you're trying to do. I mean, just get rid of them and in time. So now you think you're kind of at a spot where the cows that you have fit, it sounds
Yes.
like, for the most part.
Absolutely. And it was a pretty dramatic thing to see. We came in last year for shipping the calves, and then we preg checked, and then we did our culling, and then we drove the cattle back up the valley to utilize some of what we had saved for after shipping. And the way that the herd traveled after we removed the problems, it was night and day, just immediately. And that is,
that's awesome.
That's one of the most instant sort of switches. I mean, we took their calves off also and weaned them. So that contributed to how they traveled also. But I mean, they were just quiet, nothing fought. I mean, they just trailed up, and it was eye-opening to do it that way.
That's
on
awesome.
That kind of scale. Remove 40 or 50 animals from the herd that had been causing problems all year, and then immediately drive them again. It was cool to see.
That is awesome. I think that's so cool. I'm curious because you touched on a topic that was one of hot debate on some clips I shared once about not tagging calves at birth. And there were so many people commenting on this clip saying, well, that's just a lazy rancher. That's just ridiculous. How would you ever pair up cows and different things like that? I'm curious if you can talk a little more on the decision to drop the tagging at birth. And I like how you phrased it as it led to an opportunity to do something different that actually was advantageous. So I guess just talk a little more about that decision and what, I don't know, was it something you didn't think would work and it was fine, or what? Yeah. How did that go? This episode is brought to you by Redmond Agriculture. If you're like most ranchers, you've learned that the best solutions are often the simplest ones. Quality forage, adapted genetics, a good mineral program, and healthy soil are still the foundation of a profitable ranch. That's why ranchers across the country trust Redmond Agriculture. Redmond's natural sea and volcanic minerals help ranchers support healthier livestock and soil. Because at the end of the day, profitability isn't always about doing more. It's often about getting more from what you're already doing. Healthier herds getting more out of their forage means fewer headaches for you and your bottom line. No gimmicks, no complicated systems, just natural products rooted in the belief that when we work with nature, good things happen. Visit redmondagriculture.com to learn more. Redmond Agriculture, nature has it right. This episode
I still
is
have
brought to
worries
you by
about it.
Redmond
It gets
Agriculture. If
a
you're like
lot
most
more
ranchers, you've
complicated
learned
when
that
you
the
have
best
to haul
solutions
pairs.
are often
So
the
even
simplest
last year
ones. Quality
in Corral
forage,
Canyon,
adapted
when
genetics, a good mineral program, and healthy
when the
soil are
cows
still the foundation
finally
of a profitable
figured out
ranch.
that they could
That's why
just go in
ranchers
the brush
across
and
the
lose
country
us,
trust
and we
Redmond
had
Agriculture.
60
Redmond's
pairs left,
natural
and
sea and
we'd
volcanic minerals help ranchers
not to
support
get
healthier
diverted, but we'd have to
livestock and
push them
soil.
up to a
Because at the end of the
reservoir
day,
that was also
profitability
running
isn't
dry,
always about doing more. It's
and they'd
often
have to
about
stay
getting
up
more
there
from
so
what
we
you're
could come the
already
next
doing.
day and take them
Healthier
up the
herds
mountain.
getting more out
And
of their
so
forage
between the
means
reservoir running
fewer
dry
headaches for
and
you
the
and your
last
bottom
push we
line.
did up
No
there, they
gimmicks,
just
no
came running back
complicated
down.
systems, just natural
You know,
products
so they were
rooted in the
telling
belief
us,
that
we're
when
not
we
going to
work
stay
with
there. This
nature,
is
good
this
things
is
happen.
this whole
Visit
plan is played out.
redmondagriculture.com
Sure.
to learn more.
Yeah.
Redmond
And
Agriculture.
so then we're
Nature
coming
has it
down
right.
and kind of run down corrals trying to pair. And then, yeah, it helps a lot to have them tagged to
Right.
each other and everything. But
Yeah.
we still, even when they're tagged to each other, that still becomes sort of a desperate move. I would always rather watch them pair before I put them together to be hauled together.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely going to be a weak point there.
Yeah.
Logistically, on a 2,000 to 3,000 acre pasture on the desert, you sink a lot of labor into tagging.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if we're not doing anything else to them but just tagging them, I think most people that like doing this like tagging, like handling the calves and seeing them at birth and interacting with them and everything, but the cows don't. And whatever part of their instinct that came out that made them so aggressive, I started looking at it as, okay, you get one wreck that kills something or injures something, that value that's lost plus the labor you're putting into tagging way outweighs the convenience of some point later in the year where you might need the extra couple hours it saves not pairing them up and just hauling them by the tag, which is still a risk. You can make mistakes tagging too,
Mm-hmm.
especially on that kind of country, and then you're still in the same place you would have been. So
Right.
I was always sort of analyzing just return. It's an investment, right? Tagging your calves is an investment.
Yeah.
Especially on really big country with cows that are suddenly becoming aggressive and unpredictable.
Right.
Only at birth. Then all of a sudden, when the calves are a little bit older and can function for themselves, they calm down. So there's parts of it I don't like, and there's parts of it I really like. I like having an exact count from branding and having the calves tagged in a way that is more representative of the total system instead of their relationship to the cow. And because we can figure out who's related to the cow by watching them and have a separate documentation system. So the value of doing it at birth to us is just so that you can tag it directly to the cow, and that value becomes less and less over time, especially as the calf gets older.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd say what we did is when we were out there, we just sort of kept track of who had calved. So we kind of had a tally of the overall process.
Right.
And you kind of get to know them being out there every day. Especially we introduced Hereford so we're getting a lot more white faces, and that adds some uniqueness. So the hands and I could
Right.
see, oh yeah, that calf belongs to this, until the numbers got so big that the individuals started to matter less. And then as through the year, the individual starts to matter less and less and less as you get further away from calving.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I appreciate, you shared there's still, it definitely has some advantages in certain scenarios, specifically with trailering. I know on our farm we have 8 different pastures spread over, so we do a lot of trucking and hauling, and I agree that in that scenario, pairing with tags is a lot more, it gives you, I don't know, a little more comfort knowing you got the right ones and stuff, and don't have a calf on one farm with a mother somewhere else. But yeah, I appreciate that. I imagine, especially at the scale you're talking, the labor savings in the spring, and specifically the risk of injury if you got some little wild cows and stuff, is worth a lot too. It's pretty significant. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and if you have somebody get run over and injured, the cost there far outweighs.
Right.
Both from just an emotional caring about each other's standpoint and from the other aspects of when an employee gets injured on the job.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm curious. Well, I guess before we'll talk about, you said also you have these remote farms or remote ranches and lands that you manage as well, and the challenges that are associated with that. Talk about the challenges associated with those again a little more. I think you summarized them briefly, and then how you manage around those and still kind of try to accomplish as close as you can your goals of sort of regenerative and conservation management.
So this is a good segue. We just introduced halter and we got to be a test ranch for their
Nice.
new satellite technology. So between the collars solar charging themselves and lasting a really long time, and then not needing towers, it's just been an absolute game changer and has unlocked incredible potential in this part of the conversation, because now we can see where the cows are. I can build on my phone remotely, which allows me to change my mind. I think as I talk about this more, the ability to just change my mind about smaller pastures and fencing and implement that within 30 minutes without sending
Right.
anybody out there is just an absolute game changer. So
Yeah.
we have some country that's right along the Colorado River, but it's on top of 1,000-foot cliff, so they can't actually get to the river. But it takes 3 hours to get to where the cows were. That grazing window's over now, but it was the first time we'd used it, and historically, the operation that had been using it on a lease from us was using the closest areas, which made sense. But we didn't like how the land was being managed, so we took over it, and we took them out to one of the more remote areas that was reasonably accessible, but there are far more remote ones out there. Significant. It's hard to describe. When you're out there in the middle of it, you can see for miles of rolling grass that hasn't seen a cow in decades.
Really? It has grass, even like rolling grass, and just
it's
no
a
water.
really cool area. It has huge water infrastructure, but without snow and rain, there's no water. So when we started planning on taking this over, I developed a water capacity. I've learned from hauling that capacity is the biggest thing. You can haul as much as you want, but what you need is a buffer. And so we have they're big yellow inflatable, self-inflating tanks that hold 5,000 gallons. And last year, when we had to come off the mountain early because of a drought problem, those had just been sitting in the shop. No one had ever used them. So we had this kind of just inventory sitting. And so we had a well, and this is still remote country, so it still applies. This area that I'm talking about on the mountain, if you were to leave my house with a truck and trailer full of horses, it would take 6 hours to get there.
How far in distance is it? Just out of curiosity.
Well, it's kind of like, for the truck and trailer, it'd be the better part of 100 miles around.
Wow. Yeah.
But if you didn't have to haul a truck and trailer, or we had access to a road that we used to have a lease on that got taken away, there's other factors to this.
Right.
Like if we had access to this road, then it would be 2 hours, but that got taken away, and you just have to deal with it.
I was just curious if this is just like really rough terrain, because like here we can go an hour and a half, 100 miles in an hour and a half almost, or something like that, where it's just a different terrain. Yeah. Slower, rougher riding.
It's really rough. A lot of it is really, really rough. In fact, the area we're talking about, the new area, part of the reason it takes so long to get out there is you can only go about 4 to 6 miles an hour, depending on what you're hauling, for hours.
Okay. Wow.
Like the road base is 2 inches instead of the fine road base, so you're just bouncing the whole time.
Yeah.
So anyway, we deployed these tanks, and they worked really well for us, gave us the ability to store water all across the mountain. And the recovery plan was that we were going to go up there, set up a cow camp on top of the mountain with all the horses, and we have an okay corral and everything. And we built this big camp, and then we went and gathered for 2 days off of, it was about 3,000 acres with 6 water sources, and got them all to the first stage water for 2 days, and then started moving them fast every day. So we had pre-staged water ahead of them, and then come down one of the big shelf roads into the canyon. And so that went really well, and we discovered the viability of the tanks and storing water, and that gave us some ideas for other ways to use them. So this spring, when we had the cows on the desert and we were talking about taking over this new chunk, I developed a water transfer system. So it uses one of those pumps that you'd use on the back of a four-wheeler to spray weeds with, that's
Sure.
tied to a 12-volt battery and a float valve on the receiving end and a solar panel that charges it all. And so we put these big bladders out there with an extra 5,000 gallons on them on a float valve, and then a cellular trail camera
Mm-hmm.
to watch. And that really revolutionized our hauling to the desert, because now we had insulation against mechanical failures, rain,
Sure.
mud, all those kinds of things, personnel problems. And so
Yeah.
then we could go 3 or 4 days if we had to without hauling water,
Mm-hmm.
even though we're watering a whole herd.
Yeah.
And so part of the implementation of that was on this remote country. So we tested it where we had control, and then took it out to this really, really remote area, and then used halter. I built 4 pastures around that water station. And then we had to haul the cows about a quarter of the way out there, to where it would be too long hauling to go all the way to the destination. So we dumped all the cows off there. We used halter to hold them in a holding pasture with a small amount of water there until we got everything out. Then we built a camp. Then we got horses and drove them the first 4 miles out there, camped with them, and drove them the next 4 miles out. And so the other part of that, using that kind of remote unknown country, is we taught the cows where to come back to. So if we had an emergency, they at least knew where they came from, and where I knew I could get them resources and at least get to in a worst case scenario. And then we built water capacity with monitoring, so that we could not go out there every single day, but be on a 5 to 7 day interval on our capacity. And we could see how the cows were behaving. They show you if they're having a problem. So we could see that. We could see them when they came into the camera, and we knew roughly how long our water supply could last.
Yeah.
And then over time, this was where halter was just awesome, is we could, when they'd come into water, I would just change their fence, and that was the pasture.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, with all that technology and everything, now we're using stuff. It's the risk mitigation. I mean, you can just turn cows out, but it's the control and the risk mitigation and really managing the outcome. And these cows also were the grass finishing cows. So we also had a different kind of production outcome, in that we wanted them to get really fat and really healthy, but also have huge diversity and use this land regeneratively. So it's matching 5 or 6 different outcomes at the same time, and using technology and logistics to make it so that we didn't need to take on another hand. We could simply leverage what we already have going to utilize land. And that was a big deal for us. It took cows off of land that is used more regularly because it's easier, and put them on land that hadn't seen cows in several decades because it's so difficult to get to. And so then that goes back to the utilization we were talking about. How do we spread things over time and have the rest periods and everything, but also still run an efficient operation that's achieving the results that we're setting out to do.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you haul the water out there?
We have 2 trucks. One on the desert is a Freightliner, a mid-sized Freightliner that has low range and 4-wheel drive, and it's got a 3,200 gallon tank on it.
Okay.
And for this kind of rougher country that we're in over here, we just picked up a 5-ton military truck, a 6x6 with a 4,500 gallon tank on it, and that thing, it'll go anywhere.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. Well, it seems like, as I listen to what you're talking about, that it's a much more labor-intensive management system than it is here. I gotta imagine, is land cost virtually zero or very cheap in that region, like government leases and stuff, or not purchase, obviously, but to lease? Or
the leases are the BLM land's not very expensive to use.
Yeah. It just seems like, with all the work and labor, that has to be like one of the larger portions of the cost of per cow, or the cost, unless maybe you just run enough cows that you can decrease it over time. But all of the moving, all of the water hauling, and it just sounds like a very labor intensive system or management business.
Yes, it is. Let's see. This is
Sorry.
sort of the
Yeah.
complicated part. So it's a corporate ranch that has a big vision that
Sure.
is spread over time. So right now we are not self-sustaining.
Okay.
And part of developing all of this is figuring out how to be.
Sure.
And that's kind of the long-term goal.
Right.
And there's some other aspects that I can't talk about publicly
Sure.
that will bring an influx of capital and some infrastructure we need to make this easier and reduce
Hmm.
some of the headbanging that's going on right now. But in the end, that is always going to be a reality of what we're doing. And so, yes, adding more animals and figuring out how to do that with more animals without increasing the overheads dramatically is going to be
Yeah.
the ultimate challenge.
Right.
But I think so every system that I'm building, I'm designing to accommodate more animals. So
Right.
scalability is always high on the priority
Right.
list of system design
Yeah.
and long-term planning and the architecture of how this is all could work.
Right. And it sounds like there's a lot of potential just in unutilized land because of the management challenges that now with technology you're finding, halter and with the water tanks and portable water, ability that you'll be able to scale. There's a lot of potential for scale to reduce that overhead per animal unit and whatnot.
Absolutely, yeah. And then again, I weigh every decision against feed costs. So let's say it
Mm-hmm.
costs $1,000 a day to feed this herd. So every pasture decision I'm making right now, I'm looking at, okay, well, I know at some point we're going to have to feed. And the control that I have right now is to reduce the number of days that I'm feeding
Mm-hmm.
that number of animals, and then comparing that to the daily operating cost of running a pasture like the one we talked about, and then the scalability of it. So right now it still pencils out.
Mm-hmm.
And the ranch is carrying overheads that it's going to be carrying anyway. So I do have a
Yeah.
nice grace period to kind of experiment with this anyway and figure out when we do reach the numbers that we need to actually be self-sustaining, where are my weak points going to be? And hay costs is one of them. We don't have very much irrigated ground. I'd say right now we can actively irrigate only about 300 acres.
Okay. Yeah. Seems pretty small relative to
And
the
yeah,
235,000 or whatever. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
typically, we're only going to get one cutting off those irrigated acres.
Yeah.
So the amount of hay we can put up over time is not very high. And so the way that I've calculated to address that is to try to not feed hay. So in good years, we put up a lot and feed very little.
Mm-hmm.
And to create a stockpile that can account for years like this. And unfortunately, there wasn't enough time. We're going to have to buy a lot of hay this year,
Sure. Yeah.
even with the desert and everything. But what I'm worried about is that they're predicting this super El Nino and we're due for a really big winter. So it might be tempting to say, oh, we've got the pasture and everything, which I probably could do, but
Mm-hmm.
we're going to buy hay to protect ourselves
Right.
and then hope that we can make up for it over time
Yeah.
in other years, so having a really long range vision helps with this, but it also
Mm-hmm.
helps that there's some cushion in the structure of the ranch and what it's supposed to be. And I'm really happy when the private equity part of this happens, it also starts a timer of when we need to be self-sustaining. So
Right.
we're really making the most of this grace period right now,
Mm-hmm.
finding these problems before the timer starts.
Huh. It's actually a really neat kind of, I don't know, case study kind of opportunity you have to, put this to practice and see what's working. And so how long, I guess I'd never asked, how long have you been in this process of working out the making it more efficient and profitable and
Uh,
whatnot?
I started in February of 24.
Okay.
We took on the desert the winter of 25, and
Okay.
that's kind of when the master grazing concept
Sure.
came in. And
Yeah.
so to put that in perspective, so last year the cows traveled 70 miles from where we dropped them off in the desert back to my house. This year, if the drought wasn't as bad, they would have gone 80 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the trick in all of it is in the context of regenerative the regenerative goals we're trying to meet that have the outcome of healthier soils are leaving 50% residual. So every pasture we go in, we make sure to leave that and not overuse really any area of
Sure.
it. So that becomes the number one management objective on the ground. And then secondly, we leave a minimum of a year rest, if not 14 months of rest. Some areas will get a year or two of rest with this pasture plan. So you get some pretty massive variances in how it's getting used, which is also part of the regenerative practices, the disruption. So some areas might get used in the fall, the spring, the summer, might not get
Right.
used at all. And that gives the land an opportunity to experience different cycles, different seeds, different coverage, and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And then where we're really playing with getting into the ultimate regenerative management is the density. And so as we add animals, we can tighten up the pastures with
Yeah.
halter, same thing.
Right.
And then that's going to dictate how fast we move. But this year, because we're not going up on the mountain, we're just going to do a loop on the west side of the ranch, calve on the desert again, because that's sort of our foundational area. That's where we have kind of the least flexibility. So we also have to manage it the most carefully and tightly. But then
Sure.
once we calve on the desert, we're going to haul pairs back to the east side, and they're going to go backwards over a completely different area. And so we'll have a reversal of when all that land is being used,
Right.
and all this land that's seen grazing in the growing season will have a full year of rest in the grazing season, probably for the first time in years. And a lot of the fall country will get grazed I'd probably say grazing, I meant growing. A lot of the fall country will get
Sure.
used in the growing season and rest in the fall season.
Sure.
And so it's, taking this massive picture and trying to put it into functional uses at certain times and understanding where we have flexibility and where we don't, and then combining water and animal and
Yeah.
size
Yeah.
and that stuff.
Right. Yeah. No, when I think about all that, it makes me feel pretty simple. Like the management here is fairly simple relative to that. Yeah. The challenges are, I guess, different. For sure different, but probably easier in some ways. Wow. So I'm curious, and it's only been a couple of years and now you're hitting the drought and stuff, I guess, but based on what you've seen, what do you expect, carrying capacity to increase over standard management, I guess, in the land is the way you're managing it?
I'd love to put a number on that. I'm not
Okay.
sure I can at this point.
Sure.
I can tell you that since I've been here, a lot of areas that were dirt are now covered in grass and
Right.
diversity.
Awesome.
Maybe it's not
Yeah.
ideal. Some places are cheatgrass, but at least something's growing.
Yeah.
Large expanses of the desert had been so overused, and this gets complicated. Some of it was leased. The west side of the ranch was leased, and they had more kind of set stocked 100,000 acres. So, I don't want to get too deep into
Yeah. Right.
growing things, but
Yeah.
that's also given us an opportunity to prove on degraded rangeland in western arid context during drought that we can take land that was degraded by cows, manage the cows differently, and bring that land
Right.
back better than just removing the cows off it.
Yeah.
And so that's a really cool opportunity for the whole ranching community, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And that the knee-jerk reaction is always, we'll get the cows off. It just needs rest. Just remove them entirely.
Right.
And I really think that what we're doing is better because it's still getting a lot of rest, but it's also getting the stimulation. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's opportunity for both, but it's a great opportunity, and I'm overusing the word, to prove that what we're doing is another way of dealing with the problem.
Yeah.
And combining this technology and different ways of looking at it might be a way
Right.
to help carry a lot of the things that we value in tradition. I mean, we still cowboy, even though we use halter and are still doing regenerative stuff. I mean, we spend a ton of time on horses and ride really rough country, and
Yeah.
we drag our calves to Norfolks for branding and still have a lot of the traditional mindset, but we're using technology and these practices to make it more efficient and find ways to carry it into the future by caring for the land. So it's resiliency and conservation and modern practices combined with tradition. all at the
Hmm.
same time.
Yeah, yeah. No, for sure. It's pretty cool. It sounds like an amazing place. I would love to see. I've been looked at the website and stuff and the photos. I'm looking, at one now. It's just beautiful. Like these, I don't know if these are the steps you're talking about, but just like flat plains of growing grass with the mountains in the backdrop. It sounds like a beautiful place, and where the American West, as people think of it, is still alive and well. And then you're
Yes.
throwing in the use of virtual fence and portable water and all this stuff too. It's awesome. I'm really excited to see where it goes over the course of, the next couple of years and stuff. It sounds like you're well on the right track. And I agree. Like, I mean, I think it was Alan Savory that talked about what, his earliest experience in the kind of conservation realm was, killing off a massive herd of, was it elephants or something like that, because he thought that was the way to bring back the pasture, and it went even further back. And so, it's utilizing animal impact properly. That's the very thing that, hopefully will be the thing that saves this land. It sounds like
Hmm.
that's what you're experiencing anyway. And that's awesome.
Yes.
Is there anything else I'm sure there's lots we could talk about, but on the management specifically of the landscape or the cows and the cow type, I guess, what kind of cow type have you found does fit? Has there been kind of a uniform animal that you start to see that matches your environment and management there?
I don't know exactly what the herd that was here is. Angus mixed with something smaller. I'm not
Okay,
quite sure.
sure,
They've been surprisingly adaptable. I mean, what I've asked them to do since I've been here, going from farm cows to functional range cows. I mean, maybe not as rangy as the rangiest ones, but
sure. Yeah,
they hold their own out here, and it's not easy country.
yeah,
We've introduced horned Hereford bulls, which, you got to manage horns, but with Colorado's newly introduced predators, that was part of the reason for going that way.
sure.
And we had just dehorned the steers so that it stays marketable. And I'm experimenting with the heifers. We'll keep our first heifer crop this year. It's finally the genetics we want, and we're in a position to do it. So some will have horns, and we'll see what that's like. And then we used Diamond Peak Angus bulls, so we've got kind of a mix there. And I think because we're pushing so hard into the grass finished direct to market beef, we really have two markets. We have the traditional sales, black hided,
Right. Commodity,
good.
just animal. Yeah, sales
And
one. A
then
wean
we
calf.
have this other opportunity to experiment with what works best on the side. And I don't have a ton of different breed experience. I really like Herefords a lot. The bulls that we have are really easy to handle, travel well, breed well. They just kind of have the best of all worlds. I don't really have a downside to them. And the Angus bulls are great also. I have experience with Charlet. Their bulls. We probably don't have the facilities to handle when they get really upset.
Yeah,
At least not yet anyway, but I do like Charlet's put a lot of weight on the calf, and they travel really well, and they make great mothers, so I
yeah,
think I'd consider that. I did buy some bred pairs last year that were a mix of Solaire and Angus, and there's some good traveling, good mothering cows. They do still get a little hot in the corral. We had a couple that we had to cull for that, but
yeah.
overall, they held up really well. We actually had a group of 5 of them that somehow figured out how to travel out of the canyon that I live in December and crossed over the mountains that they've never seen before and I don't really know anything about, and showed up on the desert next to us with their calves by
Wow.
their side and everything. So that was a really, really attractive quality of those cows
Yeah.
that I bought. That kind of
Mm-hmm.
self-reliance and resiliency, and those calves were great. I mean, they did exactly what they were supposed to do and did it by themselves.
It's
And so
awesome.
it's funny because that's a very traditional concept, but I like the combination of we're providing an environment for cows to thrive, and then they're doing their part to fix or at least withstand the errors and the roughness of the country and the drought and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got a lot of the same, like the cows got to earn a living too,
Mm-hmm.
but then we're kind of babying them. But then there is still room for the cow to be a cow and for her to do her job while we do our
Yeah.
job, and then working
Right.
together with nature. So
Yeah.
I would almost describe it as an alignment is the goal more than any specific breed or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of people say Corianis would do really well. I don't know. A
Yeah.
lot also say that they would just walk out of here, which is the case too.
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 No, I mean, it sounds like you got the cow that's the most important thing. I think is just matching the cow to your system. And that includes the landscape, that includes your management and your expectations of them and stuff. And what that looks like is very different. I always, tell people too, like the type of cow we have, which is that kind of low input, hardy type animal, doesn't make any sense in a person who's a high input,
Mhm.
pouring the coals to those animals. They're just wasting feed resources and stuff at that point, so match the cow to the management and the environment. And it sounds
Mhm.
like you're finding that animal and kind of creating that, and it'll only get better and better, especially like you said, like you talked about, as you change these management and raise heifer calves, those cows will start teaching their heifers. It'll be really cool to see if you start seeing that,
Mhm.
more evidently. But yeah.
Absolutely.
uh,
Yeah, and I try and avoid containment as much as possible. I don't like having cows in the corral, so
mhm.
I keep
Yeah.
them as short as possible anytime we do.
Right.
I know I'm not really casting stones at any other part of the industry. Just for me personally, I
Hmm.
like them on range and try and keep them on
Yeah.
range as much as possible.
Me
And
too. Yeah. I'm with you. That's to each their own and stuff. I just like the business perspective. Oh, so here's a question for you. You manage 190 or 200 over 200,000 acre ranch. What is your equipment line or fleet of equipment that allows you to manage? And I don't know how many cows this like to manage this large of a ranch. What kind of equipment and infrastructure do you need? I guess. Yeah. Overhead.
Well, pickups are kind of our sorest point because
Yeah. Yeah.
we need them so badly, but the roads are rough and, front
Right.
ends, and modern diesel fun and
Mm-hmm.
that and stock trailers are pretty important. We've
Yeah.
got a cattle pot and a semi, and that's pretty important. Potentially two might be necessary at a time. The water trucks are really important. We've gone down to just one tractor, got a couple of skid steers and a bulldozer. An
Okay.
excavator would be we would use it a lot. One of the complications of this country, because it's so steep and shale, and then I haven't even talked about it, but we had a massive fire in 2020,
Mm.
the Pine Gulch fire, which that map behind me, you can see the orange.
That was the fire.
Yeah. And
Wow.
then you can see how much of the ranch it covered.
Yeah.
So, and it got really, really hot. I mean, for a short period of time, it was the biggest fire in state history until the following two that year replaced it.
Gosh. Okay.
But a lot
Yeah.
of these benches were covered in beautiful pine and aspen stands and everything, and all that got wiped out. And
Mm.
the fire was so hot that it crystallized the ground. So runoff became a really big problem, and it
Yeah.
continues to be a really big problem. And the scientist kind of engineer assessment of this is that we're having like 5,000 years of geomorphology over the last 5 years since the fire, 6 years now. So a lot of creeks that were on the floodplain now are 40 feet deep,
Mm.
and debris gets washed into our infrastructure. Logs and remnants of other poor creek management get washed into bridges and roads. In 2024 in August, we had really good monsoons that were fantastic for the cattle. It filled a bunch of ponds and dirt tanks up on the mountain where they were, but it put 19 washes across the
Wow.
road that I live on, and we couldn't get to the cattle
Mm. Mm-hmm.
except for a four-wheeler for like 2 weeks. And
Crazy.
luckily they good up there. So dealing with that, like creek restoration and road management and access are all really big problems. So a lot of our equipment is much more focused on that. We outsource our hay when we do put it up. We use a custom cutter, so we don't carry any hay equipment. So it's mostly loading and we drag a harrow, that's about the extent. We rented a no-till drill for a couple fields and that worked well. So we carry as little equipment overhead as possible. Really,
Hmm.
it's much more in the functional moving cows, moving
Right.
hay of,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and
No.
then dirt.
Right. Right. Yeah. Sounds like it. Oh, that's awesome. All right, we're going to dive into today's What Are Your Thoughts questions, sponsored by Ambrook. Ambrook is the accounting software I use for all of my businesses. If you're interested in learning more, check out Ambrook. And well, you've only listened maybe to, I'm not sure how many of these you listen to, but I ask 4 wrap-up questions at the end of every episode. If that's all right with you, I'll dive into
Sure.
those What Are Your Thoughts questions, and that's exactly what they are. They're just what are your thoughts, anything that comes to mind when I talk about them. So the first is, what are your thoughts on debt and leverage?
Well, leverage is, I guess, always something I'm looking for, just generally speaking.
Yeah.
But debt, I think of as a tool, and so it's always a balance of whether or not it's serving your purpose or dragging you down.
Mm-hmm.
In this current position, I don't have debt's not really an active part that I'm managing. It's there, but because of the structure,
Yeah.
it's not at
Mm-hmm.
the forefront because it's handled in
Right.
the deeper aspects of what the ranch is supposed to become. So at some point it will become a major part, but I'll have that same probably try not to go into debt unless it's something I can leverage into an asset or that pushes the ranch forward and has a strong return and a clear exit path
Mm-hmm.
and a
Okay.
and a really good purpose.
Yeah.
And as we're investing in cattle a lot, I'm seeing a lot of how that's going to look.
Mm-hmm.
But every animal we buy has an exit that's worth more than it costs to get her.
Okay. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm curious now that you mentioned this kind of like the goal of the economics, you're probably having to track them, I would assume, for the project and stuff. How do you manage your finances? What kind of records and details are you keeping? Sorry, this doesn't really go in my questions, but I'm just kind of curious because I think that's a huge important part of any business is knowing your financials and having a
Yeah.
good idea on them. So I'm just kind of curious what that looks like for you.
Some of that is above my pay grade.
Sure.
So I just deal with my departments
That's fair.
and I
Yeah.
have a budget. And so I track that generally in spreadsheets. And then the assets, the purchasing and revenue generation. I have a lot of say and contribution to how that's getting tracked in the future as we develop enterprises and
Sure.
how the accounting gets done. But we have an accountant. So
Okay.
I'm responsible for my portion of what
Right.
goes to the accountant and everything. But I guess the basic answer to your question is a lot of complex spreadsheets.
Yeah, sure. Nope, that makes sense. And yeah, it's having an accountant would be an awesome resource. I'm trying to become that for our farm and get better at that, but it's a work in progress. The next question then is what are your thoughts on land ownership?
That's a tricky one because a lot of people ask me if I would want to own my own ranch.
Yeah.
And the answer is no,
Hmm.
because getting to operate at this kind of scale, both this operation and the last operation I work for is not realistic if I tried to own it.
Yeah.
And the smaller operations where maybe I did own it but would have to have a second job to sustain it, realistically, like maybe I could buy 40 acres someday.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are here in Colorado that is not going to sustain itself, especially when you add in the debt that it would take to get it, have cows, have the equipment to work it.
Yeah.
I've never seen a clear path to that kind of ownership on the scale that interests me.
I Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it's a question everybody talks about how they want to be a rancher. And it's probably worth asking them, what is it that you want? Is it you want to own land? You want to own a business? That's one thing. But if all you really want is to manage cows, manage a landscape, manage a business that operates on forage, a grass and livestock business and stuff, you can accomplish that with no risk, with benefits, with good pay, and that's what you're doing. And I think that's awesome. I think more people need to consider that as an opportunity. And do you see ranch management as a competitive and viable career in the
Oh,
future? Is it? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I would say that the ownership that I'm building is in my skill set equity
Yeah. Right.
which I kind of made up, or that might be a real term. I don't know. But
Well, I know what you mean, and I think it's a real thing. Whether there's a term or not for it, I don't know. I know what you mean, though, and it's valuable. Yeah.
because when the ranch, is providing housing and then
Right.
providing a truck and the other benefits and your salary and everything, you become very dependent. And
Hmm.
so the asset that I'm building for myself is me, my
Yeah.
skill set, and
Right.
what I carry and what I can provide, the value that I can provide. So I'm try to be clear about the value that I'm providing with myself so that I know how to present it if something were to change or know
Yeah.
how to carry it.
Yeah.
And that comes down to quantifying decision making and results and outcomes and figuring out how to communicate. I guess that's what it really comes down to, is how do you communicate your value?
Right. Yeah. And oh man, I just had a question I was going to ask you based on what you were saying. Okay, yeah. So historically, I feel like agriculture has always been underpaid. Minimum wage or slightly above. I think I talked to Ray Markser, who was management of the Padlock Ranch and stuff, and he shared what he made as a ranch manager for Padlock, and it wasn't that great back then anyway and stuff. I'm curious, and you don't have to share the specifics on yours, but are there large ranches out there now that pay competitive wages, even with like city jobs and good benefits and retirement and things like, is that available in this industry, or is that tough to find?
I think yes, but definitely yes,
Okay.
because most of those ranch jobs are offering housing, some version of utilities, some version
Hmm.
of a pickup truck,
Yeah.
a benefit package, which I think everybody's benefits in terms of insurance leave a lot to be desired because of the
Right.
nature of the insurance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whether or not the insurance that's provided is adequate relative to the risks that have to be taken to do the job is probably a different question. But just to have it and have it be offered, and yeah, you
Right.
have to contribute back to some of it. But
Hmm.
overall, my expenses are much less than the
Sure.
average person. So that absolutely has to be factored in. So I would say generally the salary is going to look a lot lower than an equivalent position in the city,
Hmm.
but the soft benefits definitely have to be accounted for, and I do think
Right.
they make it more competitive. But
Yeah.
the world does not see ranching as valuable as it does tech or health or those other kind of industries, being a lawyer, a doctor,
Hmm.
all the education that's required to do it. So then in that case, I would say I think that it is rewarded similarly to what it takes to, but I think it's a lot harder than a lot of those other jobs. So
Yeah.
is it an easy way to make money? No. Is
Yeah.
it a smart way to make money? No, I don't think so.
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
you end up putting you'd have, if you were going to make this assessment, you'd have to put a value on the lifestyle and the soft benefits and getting to live where we live
Right.
and do what we do as a daily job, and that
Hmm.
has to have a monetary value that gets added to the salary to decide whether or not it's worth doing.
Right, right. No, that's fair. This next question, I'll be interested. It might be more important for you. The question is, what are your thoughts on off-ranch investing? And for many people, they own the business, the ranch, the cattle, and they have a lot of their retirement in that. I guess how do you view, or what are your thoughts on off-ranch investing, specifically in sort of a non-ownership ranch management type position?
Hmm.
And again, feel free to
Um,
share. Don't feel like you have to share specifics, on your retirement. And whatever, if you don't want to. I'm just kind of curious your thoughts in general on the topic.
oh, I have generic retirement plans,
Yeah.
one through the ranch, one that I carry personally that
Hmm.
should be combined. I've got a young family, so I don't really have a lot of extra money to be investing in anything really at
Yeah.
this time.
I know the feeling. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm building a retirement externally. I'm investing in myself, which through this, like the previous conversation we
Right.
had.
Yeah.
And then the way that carries, I guess, would kind of be an external investment
Hmm.
where it gets separated from what I'm doing now and just becomes mine versus what's the ranch's.
Right.
I guess if an opportunity came up to invest outside in a way that wasn't a conflict of interest, I would be all for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that doesn't really answer your question because I don't share in the equity of the
Right.
ranches.
Yeah.
So they're already separate to me.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. And it's just, yeah, it is interesting, talking to folks that own ranches and stuff to decide, some people are like, absolutely diversify outside of the ranch, and others are like, every penny I ever earn is back into this business and stuff. So, but I was curious to get your perspective, and it sounds like you're doing what you should do. So awesome.
I think
Or go ahead.
the most relevant part, maybe where I could relate to that in a more realistic way, is how I spend my time. And in that way, I would be in the every dime goes back into the ranch
Sure.
capital.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes
And into
sense.
my career. And it's been all consuming. And so now as I'm starting to build these systems and having a bigger view, I'm working on drawing that back. So I would say through this point in my career, it's been every penny into the ranch. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's starting to look at a little bit more diversifying in how I spend my time and then eventually probably money.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's a balance that's changing over time.
Yeah, good. Last on these questions then is, what are your thoughts on the idea of enough, and what is enough?
That's a tough one because I'm one of those people that it's never enough, just driven by my own ambition.
Yeah, I think that's fairly common amongst the people I talk to and probably the listeners. So you're right in your crowd. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess that kind of goes into the last conversation just about the balance and how it changes over time. I'm noticing a pattern where I will reach a milestone or a big success, and the next thing I do is jump right into the next big problem, just
Mm-hmm.
constantly. And I think that's where I could do a lot better in letting it be enough and taking a step back. Um, it's hard to do though, because you take a step back and you relax and you're like, okay, well, what's going to get me next if I'm not on top of it, if I'm not
Right.
ahead of it? And I think the systems that we're working on building are doing a lot to ease that. And now I am trying to catch up in my own brain and life to ease some of that, just jumping to the next thing. From a financial, a long ways away from where I'd be considering what's enough, just because the more money I make, the more I spend. So I don't really have a way to quantify that
Sure.
personally yet, other than
Yeah.
just time. And I guess what we're really talking about is the time and the experience and everything that is the money and the external investment. And so when does that become enough? I don't know yet.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, we're all probably still trying to figure that out. So, yeah, good. Well, then the last two just questions, not what are your thoughts, but just wrap up questions then is, one, do you have 2 or 3 resource recommendations that have been really valuable to you? That can be books, podcasts, conferences, conventions, anything that you would recommend people check out.
Well, I'm very interested in listening to more of your podcasts. I found
Appreciate that.
the one with Glenn Izinga,
Alzinga.
Aldersbergers.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very informative and motivating. There's a podcast I've been liking to listen to lately called The Knowledge Project. And it's not really ranching related. It's more business
All right.
and it covers everything. It's really not ranching related at all. It's more business and ideas, and there's some politics, and there's some. I find it interesting when they cross into like venture capitalists and founding, developing these tech companies, and
Mm-hmm.
some of that stuff's really relatable because it's taking an idea or a big mission, a giant mission that's externally funded, which is how I would describe this right now, and turning it into a profitable, self-sustaining business that achieved its goals. So a lot of
All
those
right.
things really appeal to me. I've actually been using AI a lot to help design a lot of these systems and take this massive amount of information and intuition that I'm using to do this and build these systems and put it on into a system and build institutional knowledge where
Mm-hmm.
if I left for some reason, it wouldn't be starting over. Like there would be a real paper trail and design on why this is all the way it is. Almost be kind of like a legacy in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the goals we've talked about where how this kind of land management can get carried into the future or adapted to different operations in the West or shared in a way that's just valuable to other people is a lot of my interest. So I've been using a lot of technology, AI, and I spend a lot of time on the computer and looking at Google Earth and that kind of thing to push it forward. So, and I actually spent the first 10 or 15 years of my career life, I guess, as an IT consultant before I switched.
Okay. So that's right up your alley then. So how do you see AI being utilized in this ranching world, or how are you using it? Or, maybe you're not using it, but you could really see the potential for it in a certain area. That's a big question I've wondered a lot.
I use it a lot. I've also kind of studied how it works, and it's at first I thought that it was like a computer program that could rewrite itself, sort of more along the Terminator
Sure.
kind,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
know, like it's some sentient being,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's studying knowledge bases and using algebra to define patterns, which
Mm-hmm.
at that part, patterns really define everything. Cattle have patterns, nature has patterns. And so, from a pattern recognition standpoint, it's extremely powerful because it can process the data and turn it into information that you can make a decision from much faster
Mm-hmm.
than I can. And so, it has saved me weeks of work by I put context into it and then work back and forth with it until I find a decision. And sometimes it's a really long process, sometimes it's really short. It depends on the process, but it's pretty amazing. You can put a picture of a cow in there and tell it to analyze it, and it is pretty darn accurate. You can put
Really?
a picture of a pasture in there of grass
Wow.
and it can talk about the soil cover and what types of grass there are and the effect and look
Hmm.
at the kind of manure on the ground and all
Yeah.
kinds of things and create an analysis for you. And then you get to decide whether or not it's accurate or not
Sure.
for what you're actually seeing. And then if it's not, then you challenge it. And
Yeah.
then it
It
back and it's
learns.
through, then you come down to the most recent thing. I ask it probabilities of the weather, probabilities of market probabilities and all that stuff. And it doesn't really matter whether it's right or wrong. It's just another source of information and another
Right.
way to create an output. And so I'll make some really big documents or really big spreadsheets and work with it to fine tune those and make them more concise or more accurate or look for errors or present what I'm doing in a more better way. So it's an excellent communication tool.
Right.
This morning, I've actually been experimenting with it because now that our finishing program is getting so big, I'm needing to manage inventory, but with live animals. So
Mm-hmm.
saying if we have an increase of demand in July, how does that affect my inventory in November? And then that affects the purchasing and the capital requirements and cash flow and everything.
Right.
So trying to put that into one system where I can make decisions really quickly based on it and be able to forecast what's coming and then communicate that to my boss and ownership and everything to acquire the resources. That's where a lot of this technology and existing business practices become extremely
Yeah.
valuable, looking at other places to see how they do it and then applying it to livestock and land.
Right.
So those, back to your original question, those kind of podcasts have been really beneficial.
Yeah.
And then I see your RMC. I've been to Ranching for Profit. That was
Great one.
extremely beneficial. And a lot of the knowledge and everything they shared there. And then I use AI a lot just for general research
Yeah.
because it's faster.
And that's the extent I use it right now. But I hear people talk about like it's just going to make you more efficient. And I'm like, right now, I mean, it saves me clicking a few links on Google or something. But I'm, yeah, I need to figure out how to better utilize it for making me more efficient, I guess.
Well, I would take what I would do with it, or what I do with it, is I'll take, I guess, some of my processes that I've been doing because the management is so complex and everything, when I'm driving, will just talk into Otter AI, which is just a transcription software. The AI part doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
And then it creates an output. And then I've used Chat GPT to create a template to store these transcriptions in a repeatable
Mm-hmm.
format. And then over time, I'm seeing how my decision making and management are changing across time, and how the systems I'm building are changing across time, and it's helping me sort of synthesize what's in my brain and turn it into actionable items, weaknesses, places where I can improve. And then I've been able to take that, because I'm now storing a massive amount of context, and then I have to produce grazing logs for ownership and BLM and everything that proves what I'm doing in terms of the total vision of the ranch. And I really want to document this baseline we're at right now to prove the outcomes that I really believe in. And then I can take those management logs and information and convert them into the reason behind the grazing decisions, and then combine those with pictures. And I can give those pictures to Chat GPT, and it will give me an analysis, sort of like a picture's worth 1,000 words. Those words are accurate enough where I can very quickly create a grazing log based on the pictures that I'm taking, and confirm that it's accurate and what I actually believe is happening, what I would stand behind. And then now, so I'm creating 2 logs side by side that are capturing this whole thing that we're building now all of a sudden. And it would be 5 times as long to not have AI in the middle of it, just doing
Right. Yeah,
So I
that makes
think,
sense.
and it's really valuable for decision making, because decision making is largely based on patterns. So if you give it enough context and enough patterns and goals, it will help you narrow down to what you're really trying to do. It's never going to make the decision for you, but it will synthesize down to the summary where you can make a quick decision off of.
What
It's really
platforms do you, sorry, I was just curious which platforms you think are best or like to use or something.
I really like ChatGPT the most. That's where I've spent most of my time. I've done some experimenting with Gemini, because Google Drive offers the best way to store all these photos and documents and logs and everything and make them public. It's superior to Teams in that way. So I've got data in Teams, and I've got data in Google Drive now. And it's cool the way Gemini can integrate into Drive. I've found it to be less helpful with logical architecture type understanding. The practical, I find GPT to be a lot stronger at. Gemini's useful for its integrations. I haven't used Claude yet, and Microsoft and Apple both have they're presenting what their AI can do into the natural workflows just on the devices, but I haven't really tapped into it. And it's interesting, you can ask AI about AI, because it's not really programmed to lie. So, you see, well, I want to do this thing. What's the best one to use for it? And it will tell you what they're all good at, and in that context and everything. I think if you take AI out of the box and just look at it as a pattern recognition software that can provide a summary of massive amounts of data really quickly, and start asking it things that you're just like have floating around in your head, and you end up putting them on paper and let it give you an output back, you'll find where it's useful.
Good.
Because really it's just pattern recognition and algebra.
Right. I like that. No, I appreciate that. Didn't know if I would be talking about AI today, but there we go. I appreciate it. Last question then is, if people want to reach out, learn more about what you're doing or more about the ranch, where would you direct them, if that's something you're comfortable with?
Our website, thehighlonesomeranch.com, is a great place to start. We do have a generic info address that's monitored, so info@thehighlonesomeranch.com would be a great place to go. I guess I'm not opposed to, unless you'd recommend against my email being out there.
It's up to you. No, that's if you're comfortable with it, I think that's just fine. So
yeah, we could do Lloyd@thehighlonesomeranch.com.
perfect.
It's LLOYD.
Yeah. And I've just been looking on your Instagram on my other screen here, and it's so beautiful. Such a cool property. It would be awesome to visit. But I so appreciate you doing this. Lloyd, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Ranching Returns podcast. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast and share it with a friend who you think might benefit from what we talk about here. Also, if you want to learn more about what we've got going on or want to reach out, you can find me at ranchingreturns.com or send me an email at ranchingreturns@gmail.com. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Ranching Returns podcast.